They cooperate with the Russians with ease and dedication. They can, on occasion, bless the captured Russian soldiers.
And I want to wish you good health and that the Lord will return you to your homeland and your families.
And to beat the Ukrainian soldiers.
Why are you beating a soldier? Oh my God!
But at the same time, they call themselves the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and they are afraid of the prefixes Moscow Patriarchate as of the plague. They even publicly proclaimed their independence from Moscow, but in fact, many clergymen continue to work closely with Russia. Why clergymen cannot renounce the Russian Federation, learn in the special report Between God and the Kremlin. Who does the Moscow Patriarchate serve in Ukraine? November 2022, the 9th month of a full-scale Russian war against Ukraine. The Russians stormed Bakhmut, throwing cannon fodder at the city. Russian torture chambers, mass graves are found on the recently deoccupied territories of the Kherson and Kharkiv regions from the Russian invaders. The world is learning about new facts of Russian atrocities. And in the center of the Ukrainian capital and Ukrainian Orthodoxy, the Kyiv monastery of the caves, prayer singing sounds. Songs and prayers glorifying the aggressor country that unleashed a bloody war against Ukraine turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg, but they served as a pretext for the security service of Ukraine to start checks. The scale of anti-Ukrainian activity was impressive. Indeed, along with church utensils in the Moscow Patriarchate, brochures and newspapers were found, where Ukraine is divided into parts: weapons, dry rations for the Russian army, and photocopies of documents of Russian servicemen who fought against Ukraine, and Russian passports, which the priest received already during the full-scale war. After the searches, detentions and trials happened like a chain reaction. Churchmen who collaborated with the occupying Kremlin authorities supported the aggression against Ukraine were found in almost every region. In Severodonetsk, which is now uncontrolled by Ukraine, a priest of the Moscow Patriarchate surrendered Ukrainian positions to the Russian occupiers.
The particular cynicism of the situation, the actions of the priest himself, is that at the same time, during the bombardment of just surrendered targets in a local bomb shelter, he was baptizing those who had been previously killed because of the same Russian shelling.
Another priest was caught in the Vinnytsia region. The Metropolitan was promoting the Russian world among the parishioners. He justified the war against Ukraine and called for the violent overthrow of the government. Now he faces up to 8 years in prison. Churchmen from the Kharkiv region also stand it out. Archpriest Mykolai received humanitarian aid from the Russian invaders and led tours of the occupied church.
A couple of days ago, there was an arrival of shell. Windows and glasses were broken there. It hit the throne. You can see a fragment. This place suffered the most. On February 24th, they started bombing from all directions, and then all the icons fell down.
The truth about the fact that the temple was shelled by the Russians themselves is prudently silent from both the priest and the propagandist. After the deoccupation of part of the Kharkiv region from the Russian occupiers, a mass grave was discovered in Izyum. More than 400 graves were there, military, civilians. Most of the bodies were with traces of violence.
There are a lot of bodies with numerous wounds, their corpses found with a rope around their necks, with their hands tied, with broken bones, with cut off genitals, with bullet wounds.
The Russian occupiers set up 6 torture chambers in the city, 6 conveyors of death, and it's hard to imagine that a churchman of the Moscow Patriarchate in a city with a population of less than 50,000 people did not know about Russian atrocities. But he preferred to keep silent about them, like the rector of the temple in the village of Dvorichna, Alexander Sviridov. He blessed the Russian invaders and consecrated the Kremlin's military equipment. However, after the deoccupation of the Kharkiv region, the courage of the churchman diminished. He fled to Russia. There, apparently for loyalty to the occupiers, he received his parish. But in Ukraine, a criminal case was opened against him for justifying Russian aggression. There are a lot of such far from sinless churchman collaborators in the Moscow Patriarchate.
The churches of the Moscow Patriarchate provided shelter for Russian militants since 2013 and before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation and the occupation of certain territories. They hid people who were wanted, and there is relevant evidence for that. They did not baptize our heroes, they campaigned against Ukraine. And now when you talk to priests of Moscow Patriarchate, they do not say that Russia attacked Ukraine.
Another loyal fugitive to Moscow is Metropolitan Elisha.
I don't want to break that age-old unity with Patriarch of Moscow and all Rus.
He wanted unity with the Russian Patriarchate so much that in early September he fled to Belgorod, where he was an honored guest of a church exhibition, and now he claims to be the abbot of one of the Moscow monasteries. The thing is, he will have to fight for that place, because competition is serious. Two more fugitive metropolitans, Romensky Joseph and Ivano-Frankivsk Seraphim, claim the same place. Interestingly, the latter fled to Russia 2 weeks before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
He had a long history of relations with Russia. He studied there, he served there, he was warned about the invasion, so he packed his belongings and fled to the swamps. Again, we are talking about the church, and we are talking about the statute. It is written in the statute that the ruling bishop doesn't have the right to leave his chair for more than 14 days without notifying his beatitude metropolitan in order to obtain his permission. That is, in fact, if we translate this, for example, into military language, he felt the place of service without permission.
But the fugitives are not afraid of punishment from their leaders in the Moscow Patriarchate, neither for AWOL nor for going over to the side of the enemy, as well as retribution for their deeds from Ukrainian justice. Priests convicted for assisting the Russian Federation are so valuable to the Russian Orthodox Church that they are becoming a priority exchange fund for Russia. The aggressor country, in exchange for one churchman, gives up several dozen Ukrainian soldiers at once.
How do you feel after liberating? Joy, great joy, and that the Luhansk region is now Russia. I think that we will remain the Russian land, and never again Ukrainian filth will touch the Russian land. Not a single collaborator, not a single criminal who openly collaborated with the aggressor, including aiming Russian artillery and weapons at targets, handing over Ukrainian patriots, military personnel and veterans of the Joint Forces operation, handing over the clergymen from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Such people were not subjected to any punishment. Work for the Russian world. For the Moscow Patriarchate is still considered valor and good.
And for the sake of such an honor, clergy of Moscow Patriarchate are ready to forgive Russia even the killings of their loved ones. Svetohirsk Cave Monastery is a friary of the Moscow Patriarchate. The Russian Church considers it one of the 5 holiest places. Dozens of people took refuge here during the full-scale war. The Russian army regularly shells the monastery. The monks were killed during one of these shellings.
Those brothers who were killed, they were probably the best in our monastery. The Lord took them earlier. We must remain in our place and meekly endure all this.
But if such humility with the death of monks can be explained by a biblical word that also calls for patience, then following statements are completely in the fabric of the Moscow propaganda.
Have we forgotten to look inside ourselves? Yes, we are to blame for this madness that is happening now, each of us. By our sins we have attracted this trouble. Now a lot of people are dying.
And this is not just a personal opinion of a single priest who finds it difficult to recognize Russia as an enemy. Such statements are an example of the implementation of the Kremlin church manuals, which the Security Service of Ukraine found in almost all churches of the Moscow Patriarchate, such a programming on humility.
This inferiority complex, the complex of guilt before the aggressor, is formed in the majority of their sermons.
After all, a humble parish is a convenient tool for a clergyman of the Moscow Patriarchate. The former governor of the Kyiv monastery of the Kyiv, Metropolitan Paul, knows about this like no one else. On March the 29th, the lease of the Kyiv monastery of the Kyiv ended for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. The brethren who used the shrine for free had to move out, but the monks chose to ignore the word of the law.
We do not intend to move out, and we will not do it.
As well as will not report on decades of using the Kyiv monastery of the case. After all, the Commission of the Ministry of Culture, which came to check the safety of cultural and historical values, was not allowed into the buildings. Parishioners literally stood on the way. In addition to praise, cries and accusations of heresy were used towards the commission.
You are not fighting with us, but with God.
And then apocalyptic prophecies were heard.
The Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra is touched, the monks are touched, and another terrible misfortune will await us. The dam will break, a terrible avalanche will fall.
And then threats to journalists. There were enough curses for everyone, even a correspondent also got one.
You will be paying for 5 generations while you are young, until you are not married. Get away from this. I feel sorry for you.
It would seem that who, if not a spiritual person, should be clearly aware that uttering such words is a grave sin. But as they say, what is the priest, such is the parish.
I tell you, Mr. President, and all your pack, that our tears will not fall to the ground, they will fall on your heads. Woe to you, be afraid.
Throwing curses is a common thing for the ex-governor of the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, Paul. Here he threatens journalists who try to investigate the sources of Paul's enrichment.
It will get to you, because the children will then be responsible for your lies.
And the following statement is actually a confession. Paul himself boasts that he once cursed the disgruntled museum workers and they died.
I said that they would die if they did not leave, and in one day 3 people died. I turned around and I say, until evening you will all die, in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. And 1 more person died before the evening.
Experts who have been watching the activities of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine for a long time believe that the former Lavra governor has long ceased to be interested in serving God. On the territory entrusted to him, historical and cultural monuments were destroyed, and the premises were built for commercial and industrial purposes. And those that were not good for enterprises were destroyed and looted. This is how the Commission of the Ministry of Culture found one of the buildings of the National Kyiv-Pechersk Historical and Cultural Reserve. This is the book Warehouse of the Lavra, a reminder of architecture and urban planning. This is evidence of the disregard for historical values. Law enforcement officers have already opened criminal proceedings on the destruction of cultural heritage sites.
He is a man who turned Lavra into his personal business. Poorly educated boor with the corresponding, redneck behavior. And there are many confirmations of this from the very beginning, and it has absolutely nothing to do with faith. This is some kind of mystical thinking.
From the church's point of view, all these curses, which he likes to pour and intimidate both his followers and opponents, are, according to the Holy Scriptures, a great sin. We all know that.
But Paul does not seem to be afraid of God's judgment for these curses. Unlike the Ukrainian court, after all, when he was presented with suspicions from the Security Service of Ukraine, he did not want to listen to law enforcement officers.
You are reasonably suspected of justifying the Russian aggression of the Federation against Ukraine. Wait, do not rush. I need a lawyer. We have the right to indict you without a lawyer. You do not have the right for that. You are accused of humiliation of the honor and dignity of citizens in connection with their religious beliefs.
telephone conversations of the ex-governor are more eloquent than prosecutors' words. You can hear how Paul rejoices at the Russian occupation of Ukrainian Kherson.
Today, Kherson should already preach the joy of greatness. There are already Russian flags everywhere and all that, and people are happy. Once people said America will be at war with Russia until the last Ukrainian, so now there's not so many left.
He calls Ukrainian military bastards.
People were handed out a lot of weapons, well, just in hands of people.
Two bastards.
But Paul did not want to bear the deserved punishment. In court, he staged a performance. Already familiar to the clergy of the Moscow Patriarchate, he pretended to be seriously ill. First, his blood pressure went up, then he had an allergic reaction to electronical bracelet.
I'm allergic to this. I can't...
Paul also complained about the conditions in which he would have to serve house arrest.
There's practically nothing to sleep on. There is no heat and light. There is no cup or spoon. Well, it's okay. I will endure all this.
There are two houses, a two-story mansion and a guest house, as well as an area of almost half a hectare behind this impenetrable fence. Judging by the number of chimneys, there are at least 4 fireplaces in the main building, so Paul will definitely not suffer from the cold during his house arrest, and there is also surely something to lie down and have a rest. On the same day, when Paul was informed of the suspicion, the security service of Ukraine came with searches to the house of the ex-governor of Lavra. The situation here is clearly not a match for his church rank. Gilded icon frames, his own amber portrait, expensive Baroque furniture and a Russian coat of arms. Paul seems to have this love for everything shiny and gold long since. After graduating from the Moscow Theological Seminary, Pavlo Lebed received his parish in the ancient Assumption Church in the Volyn region, and almost immediately he started repairs in the church and dismantled the ancient temple iconostasis of the 17th century.
Pavlo Lebed, he had no idea about the historical value, first of all, the historical value of this or that object. Most likely, he saw the iconostasis as an ancient landmark, which should simply be removed and replaced with a much more magnificent, more beautiful, more brilliant new iconostasis that would complement the greatness of the priest. Now, on the side of the ancient iconostasis, a larger one has been placed, which completely covers the entire arched vault in the inner part of the temple.
Paul is a lover of everything shiny and gold, and there are lots of things in the Lavra made in the city of Sofrina, near Moscow. At that time, there was such a plant, well, as it were in our church cycles, I mean. We have such a term, the Sofrina icon. It means a very shiny, very expensive, but very poor quality and cheap icon at the same time.
But Paul became addicted not only to golden icons and figurines, his old love is luxury cars. For this he received the nickname Pasha Mercedes, like the brand of his favorite cars.
It's a luxury. This is transport. Why? Should a priest walk on foot? It was a gift, so now I drive it.
However, Paul does not like excessive attention to the style of his life. After questions about his wealth, the priest begins to threaten again.
I ask you not to film me, otherwise I will break your cameras.
But the camera lenses, so hated by Paul, now and then catch his new acquisitions. For the meeting with the security service of Ukraine, Paul donned a scarf worth more than 700 euros. As an addition to his look, he wore a watch worth almost 40,000 euros. But the parishioners, whom Paul himself teaches to endure and live in modesty, seem to encourage the mentor's desire for luxury. There are no traces of asceticism and the rejection of all worldly and material goods, as befits a follower of the founder of the Kyiv monastery of the Caves, Saint Anthony.
Pasha Mercedes? Well, forgive us, Lord Paul, forgive us for being bad parishioners. We could only buy you a Mercedes. We couldn't buy such a beautiful car at the Pontiff.
But Paul's wealth is clearly not from faithful parishioners, but from generous employers. During searches, the security service of Ukraine found Russian rubles in churches. The top of the UOC of the Moscow Patriarchate receives them from Russia. This was proudly announced publicly during the council on May the 27th. Gathered to condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine, one of the pro-Ukrainian priests of the UOC of the Moscow Patriarchate said,
Pavlo Lebed very emotionally began to loudly restrain everyone, saying that all this should not be done, saying that we all were receiving money, meaning from Russia. We all received and do receive money from there, so how can you vote like this and condemn and so on? How can you break this connection?
And the Russian Orthodox Church, ROC, shared money with the Ukrainian clergy not out of the kindness of their hearts. These are fees for many years of corrupting the minds of parishioners. Over decades of sermons, clergy of the Moscow Patriarchate managed to undermine the authority of Ukraine in the eyes of the flock. In return, they nurtured the greatness of Russia and built a cult of themselves. Paul literally equated himself with God.
You need to be afraid of me so as not to anger the Lord. He did everything for me, brought me into life from oblivion, breathed in a piece of his deity. I became like his son.
The head of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, Onufri, is also not far behind. This is a song in the Moscow Temple.
Довкола нього є такий ореол, начебто старця, мудрого.
There is such a halo around him, like of an old man, a wise seer, but in fact, Onufri demonstrates an absolute misunderstanding, an inability to manage the church. He simply lost, if not deliberately destroyed, everything that he inherited from his predecessor. Well, under Metropolitan Vladimir, the UOC was a very respected church in the Ukrainian environment. Churches respected it. It had theologians and public reputation. Now, well, it's actually almost a cult.
And here it is not customary to notice either the excessive wealth of the Holy Fathers or the obvious work for the Kremlin, and confirmations of these are found almost every day. The journalists have discovered that Onufri has a Russian passport.
Згідно з витягом із системи Роспаспорт 20 березня
According to the extract from the Rospassport system, on March 20, 2002, in the capital of the Russian Federation, Moscow, Boris Berezovsky, known as a Metropolitan Onufri, received a Russian passport. A year later, he received an international passport of a citizen of the Russian Federation. According to the data of the same extract from the Russian database, Onufri received an international passport earlier, in 1998. And this means the Ukrainian Metropolitan had Russian citizenship much earlier.
1998 році. А це означає, що і російське громадянство український митрополит мав набагато раніше.
They deny everything in the UOC, but there are plenty of visits to Moscow on the account of the rector of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Onufri personally went to visit his superior, Patriarch Kirill, in Russia. On the third month of the Russian occupation of Crimea, Onufri congratulated the Russian Patriarch on the anniversary of his service.
Being an example of selfless and zealous service, you work day after day with full dedication and bestowal of gifts, with the awareness of great responsibility for every word.
And now the Ukrainian churchmen of the Moscow Patriarchate have to answer for their words and concessions. Throughout Ukraine, parishes of the UOCMP unite with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. After all, for some clergy, even a full-scale war is not a reason to hide their sympathy for Moscow. Churchmen in Khmelnytsky beat a Ukrainian military man.
How many people must get killed so that you stop going to churches of the Moscow Patriarchate?
On the same day, the church community rejected the Moscow Patriarchate, and in the church, for the first time in a long time, a prayer in Ukrainian was heard. Another pack of Moscow churchmen said goodbye to their service in the Chernivtsi region. The servants of the Moscow Patriarchate did not allow to say goodbye to the fallen hero in the temple.
Let him go to the church. Let the child go to the church.
As a result, clergy were deprived of their parish. They were expelled from the church. And the scandals surrounding the Moscow Patriarchate started the process of cleansing spiritual abodes of those who preferred the service of the Kremlin to the service of God, and sowed devotion and submission to Moscow in the minds of the parishioners. Ukrainians began to cleanse their churches of those who served the interests of not their country, while their priests who lost their flocks started a song about persecution.
At list of theses on which the UCMP must be defended is written in its own way. This list of theses is written in the Russian Orthodox Church, in the Patriarchate. What are they fighting for in Ukraine? Human rights are violated because Ukraine is a secular state in which the state should not interfere in religious affairs. This thesis is refuted very easily. Unfortunately, only after the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, it became clear that the top of the Moscow Patriarchate is just a breeding ground for collaborators, enemies and accomplices.
Since the beginning of the full-scale Russian war against Ukraine, more than 1,400 church communities have led the Moscow Patriarchate and united with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Because of this, the UOC Moscow Patriarchate began a real hunt for its former ministers.
They consider communion with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to be the gravest of sin and evil, and punish ministers with immediate excommunication and prohibitions for that.
At the same time, they turn a blind eye to collaborators and traitors in their ranks. It is precisely because of such double standards that the UOC of the Moscow Patriarchate is losing popularity, and because of it, it loses its main sanctuaries. The eviction from the Kyiv monastery of the Caves, no matter how much the churchmen of the Moscow Patriarchate would not like it, is now only a matter of time. Next is the eviction of the pro-Kremlin churchmen and the followers of the Russian world from the Holy Domitian Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. The cabinet of ministers is already working on this issue. Ksenia Barvinenko, Special Report.